Right, back to our top story now, and the government is redefining extremism today. Well, earlier in the programme, the Community Secretary Michael Gove told us that the new definition is not intended to stop people demonstrating and that judgments about whether a group is extremist won't be taken lightly. I'm joined now, as you can see, by the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones. Very good morning to you.
Morning.
Thanks for joining us. So let's start on this new definition of extremism. What do you make of the updated definition?
Well, the first thing to say is that, of course, it's a cross-party agreement that hateful extremism should not be tolerated, so that's good. The definition, though, really doesn't go far enough because, as you've talked about already this morning, what is this actually about? It's about stopping the government financing individuals or organisations that it considers to be hateful extremists. Well, that rather implies they're doing it at the moment, and that's why Michael Gove should answer which organisations he is concerned about. But if you really want to take action against hateful extremism, you need more than a definition for government administration. You need an action plan, you need a strategy, and the countering hateful extremism strategy is now 9 years out of date, and we think that should be updated as well.
It's interesting you say he should outline the names of the organisations he's concerned about, because we were pressing him this morning about whether those people get a fair assessment and hearing under the new definition, which is, of course, just done internally within government. So you think name and shame immediately?
Well, I think the process needs to be clarified. It's very unusual for officials and ministers to be able to make unilateral decisions like this without any right to appeal or checks and balances in Parliament. All that we have here is a judicial review option to the High Court, which is available against any government decision. But as we know, that's a very costly process that many people can't afford to take. So it does seem that the kind of design and the process and the accountability isn't quite right.
So should he name and shame today or not?
I don't think he should, unless he either has concerns that the government is financing extremist organisations, and then that begs the question, well, why are they doing that in the first place? Or two, whether he's able to follow a proper process with due diligence and checks and balances.
And just to clarify from your earlier answer, would Labour legislate to update the definition of extremism to give more powers, for example, to the police?
Well, there are a number of different things. What we've called for today is that the countering hateful extremism strategy needs to be updated. That's how police and other agencies operate to tackle this issue. That hasn't been updated for 9 years. It needs to be reviewed, and there needs to be an action plan with some support about how that's put into place. If you need primary legislation, we'll of course consider that at the right time.
I wanted to move on to the debate around Frank Hester, the Tory donor's comments, and in particular, what Diane Abbott, the subject of those comments, of course, has said, not just in general, but about Labour. She wrote an op-ed today and said, as it relates to the Frank Hester comments, the position of the Labour Party is disappointing. It seemed equally reluctant at the outset to call out either racism or sexism. Is that fair from Diane Abbott?
I don't think so. I'm very conscious that this is a very sensitive and difficult issue for Diane, so I don't want it to become a kind of internal party argument. But under Keir's leadership, it's been very, very clear, I think, based on the evidence, that any behaviour that is not tolerated, for example, on racism or any other things, is dealt with very, very quickly. That's why we have the independent complaints process, and that's why, as we've seen in recent months, candidates will be taken off the ballot for Labour if they're not meeting the standards that we expect.
I mean, it's interesting because it seems like she does want to make it an internal Labour Party issue. She said the Ford report, in this op-ed today, she said the Ford report revealed, quote, shocking levels of racism and sexism from within the Labour Party. Again, much of it directed against me, end quote. And she ends the op-ed by saying, if leading politicians genuinely want to address threats of extremism, they should look closer to home. So do you think it's fair for her to be focusing the reaction to these comments almost equally towards the Labour Party as to the Conservative Party?
Well, look, that's a decision for Diane. The Ford report that she mentioned was commissioned by Keir Starmer. Its conclusions led to the actions that he's taken to change the Labour Party around the independent complaints processes and the standards that I've already mentioned. And I certainly wouldn't come to a conclusion that the Labour Party is guilty of any form of extremism.
On the flip side, does Diane Abbott deserve support this week, any week, when she faces levels of extremism or racism, even though she's had the whip removed? Is she getting that support this week?
Absolutely, she deserves that support. And I think that was evident yesterday when Keir not only advocated for her in Prime Minister's questions, but as you probably saw on the television, won't offer any additional support that she might need from us. It's right that Diane and other members of Parliament, irrespective of political party, facing these types of horrid claims are supported, and that we all push back and say that that's unacceptable.
It's funny, you said just a moment ago that there's no evidence that the Labour Party is extreme or extremist in any way. It's interesting that we talk about this on a day where that definition's being reviewed. It's fair for us to assess in the same way that's been done with the Conservative Party this week, comments by donors to the Labour Party. On 9th of October, Dale Vince on Times Radio said that nobody ever talks about Palestine's right to defend itself, just Israel's. And he was asked, off the back of that, whether the terrorist attack from Hamas was Palestine defending itself. And he said, quote, "I think one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. That's how it works." He was pressed on the fact that this view was different from the view of Labour Party, the party he's donated to. And he said, quote, "This is my view, that's how I feel." How wrong was that statement in your eyes? Is it wrong enough for you to have to return funds he's donated in the same way that you're calling about Frank Hester and Conservatives?
Sure. The bit you didn't quite quote from that was when he said that he clearly did not support the terrorist actions of Hamas and what happened on October the 7th in Israel. So I think what he was making a point about, and it's clearly for Dale to speak to his own words, but my understanding of it is that in all of these circumstances, whether it's Israel, Gaza, or in other conflicts around the world, there are people on either side of war who end up with that type of narrative or assumption about their activities. What he wasn't doing then was supporting Hamas or the terrorist attack. He was very clear in that interview that he wasn't supporting that.
It's interesting that we come to this point, and Lord Mann, just moments before, made a very clear and impassioned call that everything has become far too politicised and both sides need to work together. And of course, today we are in Parliament going to be hearing about a new definition of extremism. When we step back from it all, whether it's Labour's response to Frank Hester comments, whether it's Conservatives' response to Azhar Ali's comments a few weeks ago, has this all become too politicised? Are both parties and all parliamentarians throwing mud too much rather than focusing on an issue that surely there is common ground and agreement on?
So I agree with John that you have to get the balance right. There shouldn't be party political mud throwing in relation to this issue. As I said at the very start of this interview, it should not be a party political issue. It is not a party political issue that you want to eradicate hateful extremism in our country. It shouldn't be tolerated in any aspect of life, whether that's in politics or elsewhere. And so really there should be cross-party collaboration and working on a cross-party basis to make sure that these definitions, the strategies I've talked about, the way in which officials engaging communities across the country is handled, because you do need political buy-in to this process as well as community buy-in. So I would agree with John Mann that that should be done in that way. And if there's any suggestion that there is party politics playing a role in here, I think colleagues should think about their behaviour.
Darren Jones, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it, as always.